Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 350, and it is time for another milestone episode, and I couldn't be more excited about this interview with Steve Papa, serial entrepreneur, mentor, and investor. Steve has accomplished so much throughout his career, so let's just dive in. In this interview, you're going to hear lots of amazing stories like Steve's background and how he got his career started in the tech industry, including his involvement in the early days of Akamai, the full lifecycle story of Endeca in terms of how the idea originated to getting traction and raising funding, scaling the company, and ultimately an exit to Oracle, the special ops team at Endeca, and how many of the members of this team have gone on to be successful founders and leaders of companies, investing all the money that he made from Endeca back into startups, the story of Toast and how its distribution channel innovation drove the company's success and helped create the vertical SaaS category, the importance of parallel wireless and why it is such a passion project for him, the problem that Shoebox was solving for startups and its exit to Fidelity, how the tech industry repeats itself and his thoughts on AI, plus lots of other great lessons learned, stories, and so much more along the way. Okay, before we get into this interview with Steve, here is a brief word from our podcast sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Steve. Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you because we've got a lot to talk about. Obviously, you've accomplished a lot as an entrepreneur. You've been very active as a mentor, investor, building other companies. So we're going to get into a lot here. But before we get into the weeds of your background and everything, I wanted to talk about a term that I heard you mention in another podcast, and it was called failure of imagination. So what does that mean to you?
What it means to me is that you look at the world through the lenses that made you successful, right? In order to, along the way of getting successful, you build up muscle memory. I used to row crew, right? You do it again and again to where you just know how to do it, okay? And that informs the way you look at everything else. So what could be a big opportunity in front of you, you might dismiss. And that's what I mean by failure of imagination. And here's the specific example. If you look at Endeca, we had 50 of the top 100 e-commerce sites. We were like definitely one of the biggest e-commerce software brands of the aughts, right? Before Oracle acquired us. And, we would do, our largest transaction was like a $7 million license, something like that for a single one. And around, in the last few years as an independent company, we would get a lot of opportunities for people that wanted a hosted SaaS version, okay? And the challenge was we had built up as an enterprise software on-premise company. So our fixed cost to enable someone was greater than what they wanted to pay, probably for 18 months, okay? And instead of looking at that as an opportunity that we need to fix this, we just didn't think that was an interesting market, okay? Had we fixed it, we may have very well stumbled onto what Shopify became, okay? Right. We didn't think that market was big enough because we were doing these big deals. It seemed like big deals, right? And so that's what I mean by that. You'll see others like Ben Horowitz when he says that big companies are great at killing things, killing ideas. It's the same idea. I used to use the example of there were these HSBC ads in Heathrow Airport. I don't know if you remember them, where they'd show two contrasting things: work, play, play, work, and it would be a laptop and a baby, depending on your perspective on the world. And I often use the Ritz-Carlton and Airbnb. Depending on your perspective on the world, the Ritz-Carlton is the greatest thing. And, I, for one, didn't really like it. I used to, when we'd have these, I'd have to go to one for like some event. And, I'm like jet lagged 9 time zones, and you leave do not disturb on the door. And then they call your room at 11 in the morning to be sure you really don't want to be disturbed. Like, I think that's the most awful brand. But some people like that. I literally, when I go into these places, I have to unplug the phones so that they will leave me alone. So,
That's awesome. All
but
right. Well, let's rewind the clock here. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
I was born in New York City, but very early on moved to the Catskill Mountains where my father moved us. He was a New York City cop and moved us to where he had a hunting camp, built a house, very rural place. Not many people know just 2.5 hours from New York City is where the New York water supply is. And they flooded all the valleys 100 and something years ago. So there were towns just, underwater. So I lived 16 miles from a town of about 1,000 people. They thought I lived in the middle of nowhere. And I went to a school which was 180 kids, K through 12. And that's what I did for 10 years. We got a lot of experience being self-sufficient, right? Up on the mountain, building things, operating machinery, you know, anything that needed to be fixed, building houses, you name it. So I built a car, built one of those Volkswagen dune buggies. I learned to drive because I was trying to make it work and I needed to drive in order to test the clutch or something like that, and that's that, it's that sort of pretty self-sufficient, upbringing. And then I got a hold of a computer at age 10. And for a few years, I went really deep down to the point where I was starting to self-teach myself assembly language, machine language. Wouldn't say I was any good at it, but I was understanding it. And that work, prior to age 13 is what allowed me to place out of computer science at Princeton. And that's the only formal computer work I ever did was when I was 10 and 11 and 12. So everything I've been drafting off of that since. So
What was your first computer?
it was a TRS-80, a color computer.
Yep.
So
Remember it well. Yeah. I had a Texas Instruments TI 994A. So
probably with a
my
cassette tape, you could play music
oh,
through TV speakers and
yep.
mix
I
yourself with
would
that.
I
So,
was never smart enough to write my own programs, but I would go to the bookstore and buy the books of programs, the
uh-huh.
games, and I would
Yep.
transcribe them
There you
into
go.
the TI and
Yeah.
save them on cassette and play them. So
Uh-huh.
absolutely.
Yep. Yep.
Yep. Okay, so but you went to community college while you were a senior in high school.
Yes, at the end of the 11th grade, there's New York State has state exams, and I was the only one who passed the math exam in my class. And I did quite well on it. And they wanted me to retake it my senior year because they didn't want to have a class just for me. And my brother was going to the community college 25 miles away at the time, and he just threw out a comment that summer, "Hey, why don't you go to school with me?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." And we made it happen. And I went and did, a bunch of credits there. Then when I went to Princeton, I transferred credits back, got my degree, and yeah, learned a ton from that. I got to see, it's a longer conversation. I can compare and contrast, kind of two extremes of the college system. I've been through both.
Right. Well, obviously, you studied at Princeton, but how did you get your career started?
So, it's actually a story of after my first year, I went back home and I knew it was going to be my last time back home for a summer. I had spent summers building houses and landscaping, operating equipment, doing all sorts of stuff. You make money any way you can where I grew up. And, and, but I knew that swinging a hammer wasn't my future. Okay. So I built houses that summer. I literally refinished my own bedroom in the house, knowing that I was going to leave it better than, it was when I was there, knowing that was it. And then, I went looking for something that, the next summer, and I applied for a couple of, I applied for a ROTC scholarship, and I applied for this university scholarship called the Martindale Award, where they help you do worthy summer projects. They cover what you would have earned with a normal job, and they fund, like I ended up volunteering teaching handicapped kids in England. Okay. So I come back from that summer, and there's a job fair, and I go in there, and everyone's behind the Microsoft table and what was then Anderson Consulting, the exciting tech things of 1992. And there was a guy at a booth that no one was talking to. He had this dingy booth, and I just felt bad for him. I went and spoke to him, and he graduated a few years earlier. He was from NCR, and he was heading product management for all these big computer systems. I wrote down good contact on his card, forgot about it, and they called me up the next spring to interview me, to fly me down to South Carolina, and I didn't know any better. I thought all places are the same. It's a good job. They made me an offer for the summer. By the end of the summer, they made me an offer as a product manager, and I never looked for a job. I was like, I could look for a job, or I can enjoy my last year at school, which is never going to be repeated. So I focused on enjoying my last year at school, spent the summer traveling, showed up there, and within a year, I was managing a $500 million product line. It was basically the first product line to have Intel chips in the data center, right? People don't realize how much the world changed since 1994 for enterprise computing. But I remember as a product manager, I released 2 gigs of RAM, which cost $2 million. I released 2 gig hard drives. The Pentium 66 megahertz processor, right? So, and these systems cost millions today. Obviously it's very different. And from there, about 18 months into it, the internet started really taking off, because I graduated just as Mosaic came out. Okay.
Wait, so you were a product manager, like back then, like people know what product management is now, or I think so, but back then that was like, to even know that was a field, right? So
Yep.
like straight out of school to be in product management.
Yeah. And, and it was very complex stuff. But massive hardware systems. We manufactured them there. I was there as they transitioning from doing the SMT in the factory in the building to transition it to Flextronics, which I forgot who owns them now. But so all those big transitions were happening. We were going from Intel in the data center, open systems. We had our own operating system. We had NCR Unix that was built in. It was 1,500 people in the facility I was in. I would go out onto the factory floor. I would sit there with the line workers looking at stuff. Actually, a point of pride was me and my cube mate were the only 2 people the manufacturing team would invite to their happy hours. So that were not on the manufacturing team. So because we took a great interest in what they were doing, we tried to help them. But that was just an amazing foundation. I learned so much, and this was a company that was losing, I don't know if it was $1 billion or $2 billion a year. This division, they were acquired by AT&T in '93. So I called it NCR, but really it was AT&T by then. And they were headquartered in Dayton, Ohio. This was a company that had maps on the wall. NCR, at its biggest footprint, probably had like 60 buildings on this campus. And they're all, and it just, NCR was the first company with a global sales force, the 1880s. Wow. They invented quota. They invented club trips, like all this storied history. And, but I'd have
for cash registers?
Excuse me?
For cash registers?
National Cash Register. Think about it. That's like the first global tech product. It was. Right. That was a technology, and it was something that you could ship around the world. It wasn't like, agricultural equipment, which eventually was shipped around the world, but a little harder. Obviously, International Harvester, it's in the name, right? They were all over the place. But the first tech product really was the cash register with an enterprise sales force going everywhere. And you can find them on eBay sometimes. They're like works of art, these old machines that they used to make. But they became a computer company in the 50s. And in fact, while I was there, they went from like 75,000 employees to like 30,000. So they were layoff. I was supposed to be laid off 5 months on. And the person that brought me on intervened, said, this is kind of stupid. Thus I continued. And then I tried to get, but the internet was coming out, and Alta Vista was all the rage. Alta Vista was powered by Digital Equipment's Alpha computers, which was my big competitor, right? Alpha was 64 bits, and they were trying to build these big memory systems to scale the internet. I'm like, there's no way, you can't build refrigerators bigger, fast enough to cover the scaling of the internet. So you needed a distributed computer. So I proposed building a parallel search engine to them back in I don't know, February, no, February, January, February of 1996. Okay. They didn't understand it. I was trying to make this point. You could have these search engines on different continents and the network of AT&T. I tried to make this whole story. And then Inc. announced their parallel search engine in May of 96. I sent them over what I was working on or what I had written up. I said, maybe you guys can use this. They don't get it here. And they said, why don't you join us? So I left, moved to Silicon Valley, and I never got to work on the search engine. On day one, they had just come back from launching their search. When they launched their search engine in May, they had a huge load balancing problem. It was not stable. What was happening is AOL was caching the DNS address. So they had a cluster. So they had 5 servers in a closet in Berkeley, which had the whole internet. And it was doing DNS round robin. So as requests come in, it would randomly assign them. But AOL would get the address once and then cache it. And AOL was a third of the internet. So the whole load balancing strategy wasn't working. So they went to AOL's, labs to see this. And they saw this big mess. AOL had built these caching servers mostly to compress images because everyone was on dial-up lines. And compressing the images made a big difference. AOL even bought a company called Johnson Grace to do this. And so they came, the day they came back from that was the day I arrived. And they're like, we could build a better one of this. I'm like, Steve, why don't you figure this out with the team? And so thus I became the product manager and I came up with the concept of carrier class caching. Okay. And that ultimately was deployed at AOL years later. I did that for a year and a half, I guess, whatever it was. And then I went back to school, went to HBS at Harvard. And that's where I got involved. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but might as well. I wanted to be involved in the business plan competition at Harvard. And they wouldn't let me. They said, oh, you're a first year. You have to be focused on your case studies. You don't have time for that. And so I went over to the MIT business plan competition. And in one of the early rounds, there was a group called Cache, which was Tom Layton, professor at MIT, very well regarded, and Danny Lewin, the 2 founders that became Akamai.
What are the odds, right? Like of your background meeting those 2 individuals, like HBS saying, nope, you can't be part of this plan. You go on like.
So I was on that team. I distinctly remember telling Danny they wanted to be a software company. I'm like, that's already done. Inktomi does that. Their particular tech didn't have a special advantage when you're selling software. It's like, is there any way you can make it? Like at the time, people would buy a T1 service from a telecom operator for their internet, right? It'd be an IP pipe. And you'd pay monthly for that, thousands of dollars a month. And I'm like, a T1 spitting out bits is no different than a cache server spitting out bits. How do you make it like that? And that following summer, Danny figured that out. I remember telling him how the way the name Inktomi came about. It was the Lakota Indian word for spider. So I was like, find some other language and find some word. And then he went and got the Hawaiian dictionary. And that's where the name Akamai came from, which was the word cool. And Danny wanted me to be the first CEO there. I would have had to drop out of school that summer after my first year. I had gotten a job at Venrock, which was the Rockefeller family venture capital firm. And, I wanted to finish school. So I didn't do that. Right. Obviously, that did not hold them back. They did very well. And very sadly, Danny was a victim in 9/11. Right. But that storied company lives on. And then as I was getting closer to graduation, there were a number. And in fact, while I was at Venrock, they tried to back Akamai. It's a long story, which I won't go into on the record, but they did back another company that I had written the business plan before I arrived there. They did back that one. So that was how I got to know Rick Fulop, Desktop Metal, and many other companies.
Okay. Yep.
But as I was graduating, I knew I was going to start something. And so a number of ideas were bantering around. A very close friend of mine from Princeton, who had traveled with me for 9 weeks before I went back to grad school. He had been trading on eBay. And he had wanted to get, in fact, I have them somewhere in the building I'm in. but I don't have time to go find the props. But he'd wanted this beer can that had the Princeton logo on it from reunions. I don't know why, but he wanted one, and he's searching on eBay. He stumbles across an alumni magazine getting bids. He goes home, sells his copy that's 2 years old that he gets for free for $50 because David Duchovny's on the cover. Then he sells an Abercrombie and Fitch catalog that had some text in there for some product he was associated with. Some person in Australia bought it for $75. And I'm like, at those prices, I want to sell everything I own. And I had a bottle of wine on the mantle in my dorm room, which had Sinatra on it. Because when I was in New York City the summer before, he passed, and I went to pick up a gift for someone in a wine shop, and it was there, and I bought one. And I couldn't find it at first. It was hard to find. And then when I finally found it, by narrowing my words just right, I found 3 of the same bottle at 3 different prices. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. That's not an efficient market. It should be one price. It's the same exact commodity. And so there was this idea that we bantered around of, what if I could create a price ticker out of every item sold so that you know what the right price, clearing price is? Okay. So one of the things you'd have to do that is you'd need a canonical database of all the items in the world, right? At the time, the world on eBay was 90% collector's items. So it was in guides. So you could literally type it all in and then organically grow this over time. So, we knew we could go to a low-cost labor market, type it in, scan it, all the stuff that today is really trivial with AI, but back then was still real work. We did a thought experiment. So, people are only going to come to the site if they can find what they need within 3 clicks. If it's more than that, the assumption was you're wasting your time.
Right.
So you do the thought experiment. You have 100 million items. Let's say you want 25 options per level of a tree to look at these things. It's something like 30 levels deep to cover the 100 million if you assume each item is like in 3 locations, which means it can't work. And at the time, the way we expressed it is I want to type in Sinatra and get a Sinatra store. I want the world of Sinatra organized around this idea. Okay, that ultimately became guided navigation, okay, which we invented and everyone uses today and has no idea that is there. It's because it works well, and it's, the user experience is very ergonomic. But as a thought experiment, so we used to characterize part of the problem with search was the million or none problem. You put in too broad a query, you get back pages and page results. You're too narrow, you get back nothing. Okay, and there's a very mathematical reason why. So we had taken the Wine Spectator database at the time. That we had gotten a CD. They'd sell the CD, the Wine Spectator data. We took the database off so that we had a bunch of structured data. We had 90,000 reviews and like 14 different columns. So think of a spreadsheet, 90,000 rows, 14 columns. Okay. If you think about the taxonomy you might build for that, would probably be 20 options per level times 3 levels, right? Probably covers it. You go by country and region and flavor, whatever it might be, right? That 23 levels deep is 8,000 nodes in a tree or a graph, okay? Mm-hmm. If instead you took all of the parameters, you took all of the possible vineyard names, the years, the ratings, the flavors, the varietals, and multiplied those. So you know what parametric search is, where you pull down the menus and you pick, and then you hit go and see if it comes back like a structured query. If you did that for this data set, there's 10 to the 34th possible cells. Okay, so we went from 8,000 to 10 to the 34th. So that's like stars in the universe, maybe more, whatever, I don't know what we've counted as what the count is up to at this point. But then when you put it in guided navigation, turns out there are only 250 million valid nodes to look at that data. The rest don't exist. There are no Zinfandels from Iceland, perhaps, right? Whatever it might be, right? Or Burgundies from Texas. I don't know what those intersections are, but it's mostly empty space. So right there is your million or none problem. Mm-hmm. You get, if you're trying to figure out 250 million nodes in a space of 10 to the 34th. Right. So if you don't know what's in the data in advance, you can't properly query it. query it, which is a very big, important concept. So at the time, the computation requirements to do this were very difficult, okay, because you had this combinatorial explosion in terms of the possibilities when you'd execute a search query that it had to consider. And our early team figured out a way to do this algorithmically that scaled. We took advantage of commodity memory, 4 gigs of memory. As a product manager, 4 gigs of memory cost $4 million in 1995. By 1999, 4 gigs of memory was like 16 grand. Think about that.
Wow.
Price erosion in a 5-year period. Like
Right.
there's a few moments in compute history where it's just insane. That's one of them, was memory.
Mm-hmm.
Just like processor cores was the same thing in the late aughts, right? You'd have to spend $20 million on a computer that 5 or 6 years later you could get for 200 grand. I mean, so anyway, so that was the beginnings of Endeca. And I'll pause there and just to see whether you want me to keep going or you want to.
Yeah, like you're keep going. This is perfect. I
Okay.
love this early beginning stuff.
So, getting the Endeca team together was a lot of luck, right? I knew enough to know the types of skills that were required. Okay, this was 99, where it wasn't hard to raise capital, but I knew I needed the right team. I found, I remember I knew I needed someone steeped in graph theory, because what you end up when those 250 million nodes is an n-dimensional graph. Okay. And so, and I did find someone. I literally remember, I left a concert early because I was like, I got to find this person. I was at a Willie Nelson concert with my friend Pete, and I left early, and I was browsing the recent PhDs page from CMU and just looking at what each person studied. And I found someone who had a PhD in 3 disciplines: graph theory, operations research, and computer science. His name is Daniel Tunkelang. He went on to, made a huge contribution at Endeca, but then went on to Google. He went on to LinkedIn. You can find him online. He's got his whole kind of thing around search and whatnot. But when I sat with him, in 15 minutes, he had taken the concepts we had been working on for several months and taken them far further than we could. And I told him, don't quit your job. I got to raise the funding. Right. Of course, he quits his job. He was so excited. He was working doing web app development, like writing HTML. It was a crime that's what he was spending his time doing. But that's a whole other story, and I won't embarrass him because he's a good friend. Anyway, I found the key team. Another person was someone who was very key to Inktome's success, David Gorley. And then there's a number of others, which I could go on and on. I don't want to start down that path because then I'm bound to let someone feel left out. So
Sure.
Anyway, I said, if this is the team and I have funding, are you in? And I went to investors, said, this is the team, you want to back it. That all came together in August of 99, and a team of 9 started on one day in a condo I was renting.
So this is a new offering, right? Like, so when you were pitching this to investors, it wasn't like a .com, which was raising all
Right,
the
no, it was infrastructure.
funding. Yeah. So it was
But they were
different.
back. They were betting on a team. The thing is, most people don't
Yeah.
realize investors would rather bet on a team than
Mhm.
just an idea.
Right.
Right? Like they know the idea is going to evolve. This is I hate to repeat it, but they like to say, I'd rather back an A team with a B plan than a B team with an A plan. Right.
Mhm.
So the A team is what they're looking for. People that will
Right.
navigate through product market fit, right, relentlessly, which is what we did, because we changed a bunch of times. So in fact, we started building it. We got our first customer in late 2000, Fidelity. They went live, and we start looking for customer number 2. There's all sorts of interest. January 2001, all those people are fired, right? Because that's the great tech contraction, right? The first year-over-year decline in IT spending in the history of technology, in its entire history since the 60s, or history of IT. And it was tough, right? People had spent all their budgets. They had no budget for innovation in 2001. I'd meet people who'd be like, wow, I spent $8 million trying to solve this last year, but I have no budget left. So no one was buying. We did get lucky. We found a gentleman, Kevin Ertel at Tower Records, who shared our vision. Tower Records was going bankrupt, so he was willing to work with us. People don't realize, like, actually, here's an important lesson for entrepreneurs. So if a sales rep would have called up Tower Records and, they would have been like, yeah, we've got this problem, but we don't have any money, right? What would the sales reps manager say? Don't waste time on it. Go to the next one, right?
Right.
But when you're trying to figure out product market fit, people willing to work with you that have subject matter expertise are extremely valuable. So he was willing to work with us and teach us in exchange for doing this for free. Okay. Which was one of the best trades I've ever made. Right. Kevin taught us a lot about his needs to merchandise products. And then Andrew Lau and Phil Braden, right? They're now building Jellyfish. They were able to grasp that, and they invented contextual merchandising, which is used all over the internet now. Okay. Was key to our product. But still, we were trying to raise funding, right? Which was really difficult. We talked to every venture capital firm on the planet. And we finally got I'd call it a vulture capitalist, put in an offer in August of 2001 that catalyzed investors to want to do a down round. And then I managed to find another firm, Ampersand Ventures. I described them as the last venture firm in the country that decided to get into tech. Okay. They decided in 2001 to do it. Okay. And I'm forever thankful that they did. And the reason why, so it was literally, they put in a term sheet the weekend of Labor Day 2001 at probably a 20% premium to the insider round. Okay. And the reason why they did that is, so we had one customer, right? Fidelity, one non-paying customer, Tower Records, and about 10 interested companies. And the problem you've got when you're talking to a lot of investors is they all want to talk to multiple customers. And I don't want to have too many to talk to any prospect because I fear it will kill the project. Although I was probably delusional. All those prospects knew we had no money and weren't going to do anything until we had money. That's the reality. I didn't see that reality. But anyway, so I gave them probably two names. And that August, one of the partners at that firm was having a backyard barbecue. And their next door neighbor was one of the other names, a guy at Our Electronics. And they literally were, they're like, hey, what's going on? What you working on? I said, I'm working with this really cool company, Endeca. It solves this amazing problem. We can't get IBM to do it on the mainframe DB2, but they solve it so well, right? And so these guys got their independent reference, right? Just luck.
That is crazy, crazy.
Okay? And so they put in a term sheet. We were going to close the insider round on the 7th of September 2001. Okay. And we basically were like, this is much better terms. We know that we only had about 6 weeks of cash at the time. Now, granted, the insiders are willing to do it, so it's not like they're going to let me go off a cliff. At least I hope not. I remember saying, look, they're good guys. We know them through multiple relationships. They're people of their word. It's going to take another week to close, but what difference does a week make? Right. Well, I think I just said that was September 7th, 2001. So 9/11 happens, right? Where we're going to get this deal done. In fact, the lead partner was stuck in Minneapolis with the planes not flying. They had a call amongst their partners and they said, look, even though everyone else is calling force majeure and 9/11, we're a firm of our word. Nothing has changed about this company that should change our view on backing it. We're going to get this deal done. And we got the deal done with like a 3-day delay.
Wow.
The partner rented a car, drove back to Boston, rolled up the sleeves, and we got done. And once that was done, we had a $2 million quarter in Q4 because all those interested prospects were like, yay, they're not going to go out of business. We can do business with them. And then we grew like weed for the next 5 years off the back of the e-commerce stuff. And, we were able to take the average website, increase their conversion by 30%, right? It's kind of obvious. If you can't find it, you can't buy it. You make it easier to find, you buy more, not more. We were the first ones to really articulate that and do something about it. And we did it in an algorithmic way instead of a bunch of manual work. A lot of other people are doing this stuff manually, but you change products and boom, it's no longer working. So we did it algorithmically, data-driven. In fact, there are echoes today where this is happening again. Actually, I'm involved with a company called Product Genius in the Boston area, where they're using AI, and they're kind of repeating this 20 to 30% increase in conversion. It's happening. Like I see the whole pattern is, another wave is going to unfold because it's another algorithmic approach to figuring out, hey, if you know more about me, you're going to be able to present things more relevant to me, right? It's not a big surprise. The TikTokification of, commerce, right?
Mhm.
Anyway, so while, one thing I left out of the story, in order to get funding in 2001, no one wanted to back a company doing software for e-commerce. They're like,
Right.
e-commerce is dead. No one's going to make any money in commerce. And going back to failure of an imagination, right?
Mhm.
Like these are the
Yeah.
venture capitalists. It's because
Right.
e-toys died. They're like, e-commerce is dead. So I had to reposition the company as an information access platform. Okay. And actually, it's a pretty simple reason why. The only software company still trading at a healthy multiple at that point was BEA Systems selling app servers.
Right.
Because of their
WebLogic.
WebLogic, I positioned us as information access servers. And that we're going to do that, and they're going to do, and this was also echoed by the early customer interest. We had e-commerce companies, we had enterprise search applications. Putnam Investments ended up spending $1 million with us around then, that Q4, to replace an Oracle OLAP cube, which was analytics. So we were at the forefront of this whole in-memory movement. Like I said, that was a key part of our architecture. And so that was part of getting the investors on board. E-commerce was a dirty word. That said, most of our success for the next 5-6 years was in e-commerce because we had product market fit.
Mhm.
Right? I could show improving sales by 30%. I don't care if you have no budget. I'm going to create the budget, right? Because I'm going to generate you more margin. So we tried to get this other side, the analytics business, going, but it largely, we would do big deals. Like IBM, we had a $5 million transaction with IBM probably in 2007. Remember, IBM has all sorts of software, but they couldn't get their own software to do it. But for analytics, we were the product of last resort.
Mhm.
Meaning, if other products didn't do it, you'd be willing to do this year-long custom exercise with Endeca to unlock the value of what we called our MDEX engine, which was our database. We had an in-memory database, right? So let's see here. So anyway, we're gearing up. I think we crossed 100 million in 2007, and 100 million meant more then. That's probably more like 250 million today. Granted, it was
Right.
perpetual. And we were looking to go public. Like we were starting to think about that. We're starting to write an S1, and then the recession hit, right? Which became the
Mhm.
global, recession from the financial crisis. All
Financial
that.
crisis. Yep.
We saw it early. Big businesses kind of froze everything in Q3 of 07, right?
Mm.
All the deals in the pipeline. We had to I remember doing a $25 million round of financing in Q4 of 07, 6 weeks from first meeting to close with Intel and SAP as the leads,
Okay.
which, and I needed that cash because I would have run out of cash in the following, January if I didn't have that. And the good news with that in the bank, we were able to weather the financial crisis. Okay. But the financial crisis brought to a head this issue that we were the product of last resort, right? Whereas people would indulge a multi-year project, with a positive ROI 3 years out. In the financial crisis, if you weren't a 90-day ROI, they weren't spending time with you.
Mhm.
And so that forced us to dig deep and rethink how we operated as a company. And I finally had to rip the Band-Aid off that we weren't building an information access platform. What we needed to do was split into two business units. We had an agile e-commerce business, and we had this agile BI business. And actually, from then, we really started to flourish. Both product development was much easier because the problem spaces were quite different, and also engaging with customers. My sales force for agile analytics was actually able to sell value to the point where what was happening is we would get a business person interested. Actually, let me take a step back. In e-commerce, we would sell to a business person who loved the idea of selling 30% more stuff. And then they typically would have a web app development team that would love our product because we had APIs to make their job really easy, but they were doing web development. So happy, we were well matched. When we were doing agile analytics, we'd find a business person who loved the idea of getting unfettered access to their data. And then they bring their IT team in, and the IT team would hear our pitch, and they were too polite to tell us, but they're like, dude, we don't want to develop software. We want an app. We want checkboxes, drag and drop. We're not interested. So that's what was happening behind closed doors. And so that it wouldn't continue. In the financial crisis, the business person was so interested, and to give that the IT person would say that, and then the business person would be like, NFW, we're doing this, right? It's kind of, and so I would get to sit with those IT people and see them squirm, explaining to me why they don't want to do software development. And I completely was able to empathize once they explained it. And we were like, oh, you want us to build this drag and drop front end. And we started that. Actually, the person that started that. So I actually went to my product management team at the time, and I'll leave the person nameless, even though they're a very successful entrepreneur, but we'll leave that aside. And I showed them something that was going to get us there. And he's like, this is not what our customers need. No. Didn't even want to engage on it. And it just so happened around that same week, one of the kids on my special operations team, which I'll explain in a moment, this kid, Aman Narang, comes up to me. He's like, I'm like the SE for our business development person. I'm not doing anything that's adding value. I want to make a difference. Is there something I can do to make a difference? And I'm like, I got a project for you. So I gave him this project, and 6 weeks later, he's got a prototype. Then another one of the kids, I'll call them kids at the time, they're all grown men now, but Jason Furtado picks it up, makes it even better. And I remember our head of development, Keith Johnson, going, who's going to support that thing? That's not a product. I was like, don't worry about it. We're not going to sell it. We're just going to give it as a services asset in our deployments. Don't worry about it. And I remember handing it to we did a sales engineer training in mid-July. And this is July of 2009. It must be 9, I think. Yeah, it's got to be 9. Or it could have been 8, whatever. It's all a blur at this point. But Chrysler saw that demo, came out of bankruptcy in September of that year, and did I think it was a $2 million license for it. Right? That was the first thing they bought when they got out of bankruptcy, because they needed to get visibility to their spend so they could actually improve it. At the time, I remember the IT people at Chrysler were very suspicious because there's only so much this prototype can do, and they saw a lot of smoke and mirrors. But that led to that product being built. I remember 2 weeks after that quarter, Keith, who ran product development, comes to my house. He's like, look, I get it now. I'm going to restructure development around this. And they took ownership of it, and we went from there. Product management got it. And we'll talk more about product management and the problem of product management for the customers versus the non-customers is a really big, important concept. Anyway, so it's also at that time, Aman Narang and Steve Fredette, right after he worked on this, they built the second e-commerce mobile app in the App Store. Okay, I think it was Shoebuy, right? And they were going to
local Boston company.
Yep, they were going to quit and start a company, which I was, happy to help them think through. Had them talk to investors, and everyone agreed it was a feature company. So we structured it for them to build the Endeca mobile business. Right? They were very incented to do it, and were very successful at it. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Anyway, so and just to put a bow on this whole idea of special operations, when we had gotten to about first of all, Endeca was located in Kendall Square, which actually. Most companies in the late 90s were more out in the 128 belt. Okay.
Yeah, Waltham, Burlington.
B2B companies and whatnot. It was more biotech, and there was nowhere near the office space we now have. I wanted to be right across from MIT for recruiting purposes. And it was a struggle to find office space. We ended up in the basement of the Athenaeum in a space. We had pipes overhead that said acid waste on them from the biotech above us. And the floor would flood. They had a water tank for fire, fighting purposes, and they'd fill it, and we'd have to pick our PCs off the floor and put them on the desk because it'd be 2 inches of water on the floor, things like that. Anyway, by the time we got to 200 people, we were, I'll call them the cool kids coming out of MIT. Were like, you're too big. All the hard problems are solved, right? Actually, speaking of which, another person, Vinay Mota at Manifold, another Boston company.
Yep, Kairos.
And Kairos. in November, and he's going to laugh. Someone will tell him I say this and he's going to laugh about this.
Hmm.
November of 1999, he interviewed, right? And I even extended him an offer. And then, like the next day, someone forwards me his resume that he had sent out that morning to someone else. And I'm like, dude, giving you an offer. Like,
Right.
what's wrong? He's like, I don't think what you're working on is hard enough. Right. And we joke about how hard it was subsequently.
Right.
Anyway, when we're at 200 people, that was the general sentiment for the cool kids, what I'm calling the cool kids. Someone else might call them something else, but I consider them the cool kids. And so what we did is we created a team that reported to me called Special Operations, where they get to work on really hard problems, get mentored by me, have more resources than a startup, but be on a very steep learning curve. And that was appealing to a number of interesting people. And there's been published stats like something like 2/3 of the folks on that team went on to be venture-backed founders or CEOs. Okay.
Right.
And that's because those hard problems we gave them when we were trying to get to product market fit, building all those custom apps that I talked about before we had the drag and drop, every customer engagement was an exercise in product market fit,
Hmm.
like literally. And so they went through that journey many times. Um, and
Well, Steve, I have a confession. So my background is recruiting,
mhm,
and I would uh, direct source out of the special ops team because I knew those people were
mhm,
amazing, right? Like
yep,
for like my specialty was product management. So
mhm,
if I could get an Andrew, a Steve, or any Amon, like they were
yep,
like
mhm,
brilliant people that like I caught onto the
yeah,
special ops team early.
yep. But it was a little university for product market fit, basically.
But I was not successful in recruiting anyone out though.
They needed to do their own thing for the most part.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
um, anyway, once once we separated two business units, they really both started moving at a much higher velocity. Okay. And in summer of 2010, I think it was in August. No, wait, no, wait. Let me get this right. Was it 2010? I think it was
I think
2000.
August 2011 with the Congress debt
Is that when it
default.
was? Yeah.
I
So
think so.
yeah, in 2011, IBM expressed interest in buying the company. I wasn't interested. They put in an offer. I was ignoring it. And then early August, the Congress was defaulting on the debt. And I'm like, F. Like basically,
Again.
late, 99, we had the tech bubble crash, had
Right.
the financial
Gearing up for
crisis.
IBO.
I'm like, last thing I need is another one in a thinly capitalized company. So I, there were only about five. I thought the company was worth over $1 billion. There were only five companies that had the wherewithal for that kind of merger in 2011. Like now that seems small, but that's where things were in 2011 coming out of the financial crisis. One of them was one of our investors, SAP. I couldn't even get them to take a meeting.
Which
Right?
is shocking.
It is.
Shocking.
It's crazy. Um, and but I had been with Oracle's head of corporate development. Actually, another small story in this. Um, Along the way, we had two big competitors. One was a company called Autonomy,
Mhm.
um, of Mike Lynch fame, the guy who was just acquitted, even though his CFO went to jail for fraud. I
Mhm.
don't know how the CEO doesn't also go to jail for fraud, but I'm finding more and more the legal system doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. So the second company was called Fast. It was a Norwegian search company. Another fraud. So my two big competitors were frauds. They turned out the Norwegian company faked a third of their revenue. I mean, Autonomy also faked a ton of their revenue, right? As I said, their CFO went to jail. And so one of our biggest struggles building Endeca, there were analysts, particularly the Gartner analysts, that would make our dots smaller because you're not as big as Fast. And I remember the Gartner analyst was literally in the Fast offices the day they were announcing they're retracting their financial results because they were, I view it as bribing the analysts to not be too hard on them because they're funding them, right? Um, Turned out that I think that was late 2007. So Steve Ballmer of Microsoft fame, I believe, woke up one night during Christmas vacation and was like, I'm going to get those Google guys. And that's when he put out an offer to buy Yahoo, I think it was at the time, was
Yeah.
And he put out an offer to buy Fast because of their enterprise search business. Okay.
Okay.
And the then Michael Lynch autonomy at the time said it was like the cartoons where the woman is tied up on the tracks and ropes and the train is coming. And just at the last moment, someone pulls them off the tracks. And that was Microsoft buying them for $1 billion. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that catalyzed Oracle to reach out. The Oracle Corp dev reached out because they had to respond to Microsoft. So they came out and visited us, had a wonderful day. They were like, we got to do this. And we're going to do a call the next morning. I'm flying back to California. Next morning, I'm expecting this call with that person and his boss. Well, it's just the boss. Oracle had announced like a 10% reduction in force that morning because they were merging with BEA systems. So going back to the circle.
Right.
So they had to tell the street, there's a big acquisition. We're going to, get our expenses in line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's off. But I stayed in touch with Corp Dev. And in May of 2011, the year we ultimately got acquired, I remember sitting with their head of Corp Dev. They said, look, there's not a priority area for us. But if you're ever going to disappear, let me know. And so I did that in August once I decided I'm not going to let the Congress throw the economy into a tailspin. And 2 weeks from engaging them, they put out an offer. And 4 weeks later, we announced it. And then all the emails to my then BlackBerry kind of stopped. We merged. I like to say I got Larry Ellison to buy a database for $1 billion, right? That's the funny part there.
Right.
And they did well by it. I know you had asked a question about the puffer fish.
Yes.
So we
fish.
invested a lot in culture at Endeca. In fact, my brother worked there and was responsible for all of our facilities, right? And one of the things that along the way, we moved into actually in 2001, we moved into a space that had been built out by IXL, one of the internet.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
We spent
I remember
several
IXL.
$1 million building out a space, never occupied it, I don't think. So we subleased that with everything in it, but it included the saltwater fish tank with the fish, including the puffer fish. Okay.
Right.
And when we moved on from there to the next space, there's no way we were leaving it. We had to bring it with us, and it became sort of a mascot. Anytime it would puff up, there'd be the photos going around, email. And so we announced with Oracle. And then there's this 2-month period between announcement and close. And then even then, there's another 3 months before the merger's done. And I describe it as they're disinfecting the company. They're sanitizing it and whatnot during that period of time. And one of the things, there's a no pets policy at Oracle, or there was at the time.
Right.
So facilities guy shows up. I remember IBM, you couldn't have milk in the fridge because it could go sour. You couldn't do Girl Scout cookies. There's all these rules that some lawyer requires for some corner case. Anyway, someone shows up, all these got to go. And I remember my brother's like, why would you do that? This is crazy. They're like, no, they got to go. So fine. The day he gets rid of them, basically this tank's in the middle of our product development organization. So we went from Oracle's going to be this great thing. They're not going to change anything. You're going to keep doing the things you love, to they're making changes right in their face. It's no longer the company that you love. And there were like 5 resignations that day. And those resignations continued to the point where by March, there were Oracle executives, like VPs, reaching out. How can we get some puffer fish back? And in fact, their head of corporate development cited this at one of their earnings or analyst calls. So it's kind of out there.
The puffer fish. Well, Scott Kirshner had that article about the puffer fish, which I dug up and I was laughing. And I think it was an article that he mentioned when I first heard the original name of Endeca, Optigraph.
Yes. The co-founder, Pete Bell, had the domain name. So when we're in stealth, it was like, okay, great. We got a domain name. Let's use that. And, we even had a logo at some point.
With Optigraph?
Yeah, Optigraph, which was the device Steve Martin invents in the jerk. Right. Yeah. So, but he also gets sued at the end over patent infringement for this thing.
Right.
We get hate mail from someone, you're going to get sued. And actually, ironically, we did have a massive bunch of patent trolls at the end of our existence that we had to fight in court. But anyway, so maybe there is something to that. But I still have people reach out occasionally that I'll run into, or I'll just get a random email or LinkedIn, someone reminiscing about that, being in a meeting room with me in 2001, where I introduced myself as Steve Papa from OptiGrad. So
That's
in fact, I got an
legendary.
email today from someone that knows me from that. The So anyway, and then we had the big name off. We were at 50 people, and everyone suggested names, and there's all sorts of funny stories. But we ended up down to two. One was Endeca, which is derived from the German Entdecken, which is the word for discovery. And the other one was Axela, Axala, which had, the domain was available, had this, denote scalability and dimensions. And we voted, and Axela won. And it was on a Friday. People go home. And then on Monday, one of our developers says, Steve, my wife's a doctor. And she says, Axela sounds a lot like Axilla, which is armpit. We're going with the other name. So we dodged that bullet. Anyway, so we sell the company to Oracle. I spent a year, helping with that transition, but they didn't really, they didn't have a need for me. And so I went and started new stuff.
I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. Endeca sells to Oracle for over $1 billion. So after the transition, there obviously was an opportunity for you to do so much more, and that definitely happened with all the companies. So let's talk about that.
I took the money I made from Endeca, and within 2 years had invested it all. Like, it's an extreme way of doing things. Let's put it that way. I mean, before we even closed with Oracle, I had spun a company out of EPFL in Switzerland called Candu. They're doing their chips and the latest product they're working on is actually critical to scaling AI. It's chipped to solve the memory problems of AI and whatnot for web scalers. So
we're going to talk about Toast and some of these other companies that I was very familiar with, but that was one where I was like, how did you even things that you run are just so many different lanes.
Yeah. Well, a number of them that seem weird all have mathematics as a common theme. Like, for whatever reason, that's, Endeca was mathematical, Akamai was mathematical, Candu is mathematical, Product Genius is mathematical. Select, which was, I backed an MIT professor, was acquired by Nike, mathematical. Even some other silicon I'm doing at Parallel Wireless with another company was mathematical. So anyway.
But I heard you say on a podcast that silicon, like, investors weren't investing in silicon, and you
Correct.
knew that was the time to get in.
Yes, I knew. Yes. Well, I was absolutely right. It needed to be done. Whether it was the right time to get in we could debate that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
But everyone's seeing now all progress is based on silicon advancements, and starving the silicon pipeline in the aughts, was a problem, right? The opportunity cost there. Even today, right? Like, I look at the big web scalers, their growth and their ability to improve their margins and enable new products and services really comes down to silicon. Okay. You can see Google showing their carbon footprint is growing dramatically from AI. They literally should have investments in 20 silicon companies where they expect 19 of them to not yield anything, and one not necessarily to even yield the value of the investment, but to create the value by making a difference in their infrastructure. Mm-hmm. They're not yet able, the leverage is so high, right? Like, literally at Candu, they will enable people to reuse memory multiple life cycles instead of one life cycle and then you throw it out, right? And there's a lot that goes into that. That alone could be worth $1 billion a year to a web scaler. Mm-hmm. So having $1 billion portfolio with $50 million investments in 20 companies, so that just one hits the operational jackpot. Mm-hmm. And that's not venture capital investing even. That's
Right.
building a portfolio of call options to advance your own business. Okay. There's still not enough of it being done. Even with CHIPS Act and all the stuff, we're not doing enough of it because it is, they are high failure rates. It's, either you get lots of customers or you get none, right? The product is very hard to develop. You have to spend a lot on tools. You have to spend a lot on fabbing, right? It's not like you just go write some software and put it out there. No, you might have to spend $5 million on a product mask, right? To make the chip after you've spent $5 million on tools. And venture capitalists don't want to back that stuff. Okay. Even though that's the seed corn for everything that they then go on and do. Anyway.
Well, that's what Andreessen Horowitz is doing now, right? Like
now, 15 years later, right? After it got so painful, but they should have been doing that 15 years ago, right? They were too busy with software eating the world, not realizing that, without the fertilizer and seed corn from silicon, is going to hit a wall, right?
Got it.
So anyway, but that's where the original parallel wireless, some folks came up to me and I put some money in there. They were doing small cells. And we'll talk about parallel later, but this is also where Toast comes in. So we talked about Aman and Steve, and there was a third one, Jonathan Grimm, that were involved at Endeca. When we announced the Oracle acquisition, they all wanted to quit. I said, guys, just sit tight and learn something here, right? Don't just
right.
So they were restless pretty quick. They had their idea to split the tab at the restaurant. I mean, I was going to help them, but I'm not a consumer person. So I had nothing really to offer them other than to connect them to investors. That all shut them down. And then they wanted to build the point of sale, and they were literally incubating at Bessemer's offices, right? So I wonder if Kent brought this up, right? So they incubated there. Kent was not interested in what the Toast guys were doing. It's like, yeah, whatever. So Aman said to me, Steve, we really want to do this. And I'm like, guys, we talked about it and, we analyzed it a lot. And I'm like, I don't know. There's 500 point of sale companies. I don't see how you're going to do this, but I believe you'll build a good product. There'll be an acqui-hire. We structured a deal where I put in $500,000 and I figured I'd get my money back. That was kind of my expectation, but Aman wanted to do it. I owed Aman, right? Remember what I said earlier? My product manager, who was a successful entrepreneur, was like, oh, our customers don't need this. And Aman made it happen. And that was what allowed me to pivot the company at scale, that prototype. Okay. Because no one would listen to me. Just because you run the company doesn't mean people listen to you. So, anyway.
But now you're coming full circle to disrupt NCR.
Yes.
Like point of sale system.
Yes. Although I was on the computer side there, so I wasn't involved. I mean, I touched on those guys a little bit now and then.
Right.
But anyway, let's see here. So, I'd like to describe, they were backed on the ramen noodle plan. Okay. Where they were getting small checks, but by the time they burned down 250,000 of that, they had their first 10 prospects. And one of them was displacing Micros, which was a company Oracle then went on to buy for several $billion. And I'm like, there must be something here. So I kept putting in more money. I went up to 10 million into the business. And it was growing like a weed. And at that point, Kent at Bessemer wanted to see it. And I'm like, just sit tight, guys. There's no need to expose what's going on here. Let's keep this going. And then, 2 years later, everyone's clamoring to invest in it. It was growing like a weed. The wheels were flying off at around 100 customers. And I brought in Chris Comparato as CEO. He was the best general manager we had in Endeca. He really teamed up with these guys. And they did a phenomenal job building that. I was very involved early on, right? I consider myself a half founder. I don't want to take more credit than that. I solved their financing. Sure. I brought their first big strategic deal. I brought them Gordon Food Services, which spent $1 or $2 million with them when they only had 1 or 2 customers live, right? And they were their key to learning about enterprise restaurants, or not enterprise, but I'd say full service restaurants. Right. They really taught them the business.
And I remember their first customers, Firebrand Saints. Like, wasn't that the CIC or Tim Rose?
Yeah, that was the split the tab company.
Okay. So that was
a horrible implementation. They would brought another tablet for the server to worry about. Servers are
Okay.
already overloaded. They don't want to rekey it into another one.
Hmm.
And they were like, oh, we got to integrate with the point of sale to get rid of this. And they're like, we can build a point of sale easier than it is to integrate with those junky things. I mean, it's not true. They were able to build something that was successful, but it was a fraction of what was in those systems. And the funny part now is they're now doing those long tail of features, right? Because they are the big guys now.
Right, right,
In
right.
100, I mean, they'll be in 150,000 sites this year at some point.
The success is amazing what they've accomplished.
Yep.
And the brand, right? When you go to a restaurant, there's just that brand everywhere, which just, it's awesome that that's a Boston tech success story. But the day of the IPO, what was that day like?
Well, I was remote. I was not there. I mean, I'm not one
Okay.
to take the limelight from these guys.
Yeah.
But no one thought it was going to go anywhere, right? I mean, I remember a prominent Boston venture capitalist who's like, it's hard to sell to restaurants, and it's crowded. No one's going to make any money. Or I remember another one who was like, why are you embedding these payments? These payments is low margin. People actually don't. I mean, most people don't know why Toast is successful. They think it's the
Mhm.
technology.
Right.
And they built a good product. I don't want to take away from that. But the
Mhm.
reason why Toast is successful is distribution channel innovation.
So I did want to talk about that. So going back to Aman, right? Like
Yeah,
he,
totally. First of all, Aman,
he,
no one ever would have imagined Aman figuring out how to go to market, right?
right. He
People,
wasn't a sales guy. He
Aman
was a
was easy to
product
make
guy.
fun of for lots of reasons when he was at Endeca. Okay. He'd always get frustrated. They'd build a prototype. Like, engineering is going to take 9 months to turn this into a product. And the prototype, I mean, yeah, because there's a lot to building a product. This prototype wasn't a product. Right. So,
Right.
but anyway, the by the second customer, Aman figured out, hey, why should I have the payments companies as a channel? Why don't I just embed the payments? And he showed me the spreadsheet. And Aman has since reminded me, when he showed me that spreadsheet, I said, with this, you might actually have a business. So, and because suddenly there was enough ARPU to fund a direct sales force. Because there's always been this problem. I mean, if you go back to the 90s, the world's changed a lot from then, but that's when I was brought up. So that's what I know. You could distribute products under $1,000 through retail, Staples, Costco, whatever. There was a way to distribute. And you could distribute products over 70 grand with a direct sales force. Maybe there was some you could sell over the phone, for a few $1,000 products, but not much. And so the problem was anything from like $5,000 to $75,000 was in no man's land because you couldn't distribute it. Okay. It was a problem. And so Toast faced this. Okay. But by doubling the ARPU, they could afford, lifetime value of that customer, a direct sales force, and scale that up. And we knew we were onto something. And in fact, our competitors were using the payments companies as their channel. Okay. And there's a whole bunch of them. And so we actually intentionally did not put sales reps in Silicon Valley because we did not want the competition to see this happening, because we were all in these, the flyover parts of the country. And because every month we were getting stronger, and every month they were getting deeper in their distribution model with the payments companies, making it harder to pivot. And so the more we created that separation, when they finally woke up, it was going to be that much harder for them to catch up. Another way we'd say we opened up the wormhole to scale up, and we ran through it, and it closed behind us. Right? That's what happened. Okay. And we plowed everything into building a bigger product footprint, inspired by what the Salesforce.com folks did, right? Built a big product footprint. And yeah, that's what got them to where they are. So,
And one could argue Toast was one of the first companies that established vertical SaaS
totally.
category.
Yeah. I mean, it's a debate between them and Shopify is
Right.
my guess.
Yeah.
The Shopify also, they started out as an app for running a bike shop, and they
And I didn't
eventually
know
evolved
that.
into that. So obviously that worked out well. I did have a choice at one point. Do I go in? Should I have been the CEO at Toast? Right. I don't think my strengths play well to that. Right. So it was probably better that it was someone else. I got very deeply involved in parallel wireless and changed its vision to be something completely bigger. It's a really hard problem. I'm taking on Huawei, the Chinese. Um, Wireless infrastructure is a national security risk when it's from untrusted vendors. Um, if you look at what happened just in the past few years, right? Look at over in Ukraine, how they rely on the cell infrastructure. Okay. Or look at, the whole mess in Israel and Palestine where the cell network was cut off, right? Because someone has control over it. And you can be guaranteed if ever China invaded Taiwan, right? There's a ring of countries in that region that have all Huawei equipment. If those guys spoke up, I guarantee you those networks would go down until they shut up. so,
Mm-hmm.
so it's become a passion to solve this problem. I won't go into all of the details, but it's incredibly hard. It's like trying to have 15 startups in one. Okay. We'll save that for the future when I'm willing to share more there. But we are building networks around the world. They're small scale, and I'm working on solving the problem so that we can become the preferred provider for large scale networks. That's what I've been so busy on and why you've had such a hard time getting a hold of me.
I'm sure you've been traveling nonstop, so I knew it would take some time. And
There's only three customers a country. So that makes it hard. Like, so a sales trip isn't like going to visit 10 customers in the Midwest. You're going from, a different country a day. Right. So
yeah, like you're selling infrastructure, and like I thought about that when I was looking at your website and looking at your customers. I'm like, it was hard to sell Endeca's products. This is totally different stratosphere of a
well, yes,
sales cycle. And
it's what I don't think the selling is that hard. It's having the product market fit, having enough of what they need at the
mm,
price points, because price is everything for these guys.
mm,
I mean, these
yeah.
are $1 billion deals. So 10% is real money. It's not like, okay, I'll spend 10% more because I like the salespeople, right? I mean, granted, there is corruption that happens in this industry. The big competitor is Ericsson. Ericsson's business model is to have a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violation every 5 years and pay $1 billion fine. It's baked into their financials, as far as I can tell, because it just happens again and again and again. And that's the nature of these very large transactions. So it's, makes it challenging.
Well, another one of your companies that you invested in was Shoebox, which
Yep.
ended up being acquired by Fidelity, and Fidelity's private shares is kind of the umbrella
Yep.
division of Fidelity, which I like. That was it seemed like that was a perfect match, meaning I've seen that team being very active in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and what they've been
Well, yeah,
doing.
part of it is their customers is the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So they're more
Right.
visible, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They built a very good product. Um, I mean, we could spend an hour dissecting what we did well and where we made mistakes, because it's in the same space as Carta. Carta clearly won the space. We started before them, right? So we should have had that. And we pursued solving what ultimately ended up being I don't want to say an exercise in futility. I wanted to automate financings completely. Okay. And we have it. The problem is attorneys are paid by the hour. They all want to sound smart and argue over stupid stuff. Okay. They undermine their clients by doing this. AI is going to bust it up. AI is going to, it's like the Warren Buffett, when the tide goes away, you see who's, wearing shorts or not. Okay. Well, you're going to find that a lot of the stuff the attorneys were doing was because, it's like, hey, here's a term sheet. Go find 10 hours of markups in it, was the business model. Not, here's a term sheet. Get this deal done for the client. That's really what goes on behind these doors at these high-end firms. Okay. Then in my analysis, because you're paying lawyers with extremely expensive capital early on. I mean, it used to be, 50 grand for a financing. Okay. Or 100 grand for financing it was becoming. And it's like, 100 grand on a $4 million financing. That's 2.5%. My
Yeah.
math on the transaction fees for attorneys, they got about 5% of your cap table. So you think about it, you build a company for 10 years and you end up with 10% of the equity, but 5% of the equity went to a lawyers for these docs.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes your head explode. Okay. There's
Mhm.
something wrong. And so that's what we're trying to solve. Now, Carta went and solved a much simpler one and built a network effect. that they could then have backed into. They should have actually acquired Shoebox. That would have given them a whole bunch of other things to do. But it's working out well for Fidelity. I think it's a great product. I use it. I mean, a lot of the ideas came from my needs trying to, build, a dozen companies in parallel, right? It's the same problem over and over again. Everyone thinks they're special. They think their investor docs should be special. They shouldn't be. There's something wrong if they're special, right? But if you're paid by the hour, you're incented. I mean, I'll never forget, this happened at Endeca when I changed law firms between my first round and second round. I'll leave the firm nameless that was on the first round, but they had an associate that had a friend at the company that he was, let's say, advising to undermine me. We'll leave it at that. So,
Okay.
and I figured this out, so I fired them. But anyway, so I go to do my Series B, and I'm like, it's going to cost a lot less. I've already got these docs. They just got to change the A's to the B's. I mean, how hard could this be? Right. So I see the markups, and this attorney has marked every reference to Delaware. They've changed it to state of Delaware because it might be ambiguous. Delaware C Corp. And, they're charging me to do that nonsense. Right. And then the other side takes more time looking at all the nonsense. Right. And accepting it. And, it's so clear what's going on. Right. Instead of focusing on what actually adds value, what matters. Right. And so that was that was the beginning of a lifelong frustration with attorneys. So, yeah, that's the Shoebox story.
All right. So what's you're like, what's next? Like, what's next for you? Like your parallel wireless.
I gotta finish this battle with Huawei. So when I'm done with that, then the next wave of things. I mean, if I wasn't doing wireless, I'd probably be in the middle of like energy efficiency, heat pumps, how we solve those problems. I'm fascinated by them. That's what I do in my spare time is I'm putting in geothermal, and I do a lot of it myself. That's what I like to do. That's, a lot of important things to be done there. But right now I got to solve this wireless stuff. So I got to bring 5G to the rest of the world. So
that makes sense. And you already answered the question, what you're spending your time outside of work doing, family and enjoying your kids. So
pretty much, I mean, the other thing is, I've now been through, I'm on this is coming into my fourth decade of following the industry very closely. And it's kind of frightening to say that, but everything repeats every decade. It's the same story, right? Yeah. Like take the analytics stuff we did at Endeca. In the late 90s, Cognos and Business Objects, they get acquired in the mid-aughts. A few other companies come. Endeca was one of them. 10 years later, the next generation. 10 years later, the next generation. I see no reason for this to not keep happening. Same thing we saw, WebEx, Zoom. Before WebEx, I don't even remember what was there before, but there was something.
Alta Vista, Yahoo, Google.
Yes. Now Google has persisted. I mean, Google was lucky in that because of the tech bubble collapse, all of their competition was either died or was bought and absorbed and died inside Yahoo. So they had a free reign for that decade to kind of, to clean up. So there are moments like that, it's just how history unfolds, right? I mean, when I was at Inktomi, we had the search business in 1997. I remember at a strategic offsite, we were talking about the search business was a cash cow. We're not investing in it strategically because it's a commodity business. CPMs are so low, it's never going to be the big growth business. Failure of an imagination right there. Okay.
Full circle. AI obviously is everywhere. Like I'm sure you think about these things. I know just how your mind works. I'm sure if you could start a business leveraging what's happening right now.
I'm involved in a couple of AI companies, right? There's Product Genius, one I mentioned, which is for commerce, which is showing the 20, 30 point conversion rate improvements. And then there is a company called Descara, where we're building AI for ERP. And that,
Mm.
keeps me, very engaged in all the implications of AI, which are very high variance still, right? It's unclear where it all goes. I mean, there's definitely in some places there's clarity, like certainly in the creative economy, right? If you're a graphics designer, animator, very clear what's going on there.
Right.
Um, but you know, we have applications for AI in 5G and 6G. Again, some that are very clear and some that are very high beta, right? And
Mhm.
some I'm skeptical on. I think it's easy to say AI is this magical thing, but it's, in many ways, what the magic is, it's able to summarize the corpus of human knowledge,
Right.
which every one of us only experiences, in the millionths of a fraction of that knowledge. So
Mhm.
something that actually has the wisdom of all of it is a wild thing to see,
Yeah.
even though it's just reflecting back that corpus. That's all it's doing. Right.
Well, Steve, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through, your background story, obviously all the great company stories of Endeca, Toast, and the lots of others, Parallel Wireless, and other companies that you've been associated with, and obviously all the great advice along the way.
All right. Very good. Well, happy to do it and best of luck.